was notable on May 9th that President Putin did not call for a general mobilization of all men under the age of 60, as President Zelensky has done in Ukraine. So I think one problem for the Russian armed forces is that they face a manpower shortage that will only gather pace as this war goes on, drags on. And they are also losing a lot of equipment, weapons, and materiel, and have been having trouble replacing them. As I've understood, two of their tank factories are closed down now for lack of spare parts. Again, the sanctions are beginning to bite. I was impressed this morning when I saw the news, at least according to the local officials, that Ukraine had regained about 20% of the territory that Russia had taken over in those two cities. So we will have to see. It's interesting you note that Russia denies it, but perhaps the momentum is shifting back again to the Ukrainian side.
It does look, though, as though this battle, as with so much of the fighting along the east of Ukraine, it is taking place at a ferocious level with just horrendous loss of life.
It is the case, and also civilians are being affected. A couple members of the press corps, one was killed, several were injured. Reuters correspondents were injured, and that in addition to the continuing civilian casualties and deaths that have been occurring. And so that is one of the major problems here. The military, of course, are in it for the fight. Sad to see anyone lose their lives, but they're in it for the fight. But in these towns, there are, in Severodonetsk, there are still upwards of 17,000 people there, as I've read, and in Lysychansk, about 22,000. So there are civilians sheltering in basements and barely able to hold on.
We're hearing, though, that whatever is happening in these key cities, Russian forces have succeeded in gaining control of about a fifth of Ukraine's territory. That's what President Zelensky has said. I mean, it does show that even though the Russian invading forces have had a lot of setbacks, they are gradually gaining ground, aren't they?
They're throwing tremendous resources at this war and burning them up. I've been saying grinding them up in the battles. We will have to see if they are able to continue with this ferocious pace. That word is very apropos, I think, because it was notable on May 9th that President Putin did not call for a general mobilization of all men under the age of 60, as President Zelensky has done in Ukraine. So I think one problem for the Russian armed forces is that they face a manpower shortage that will only gather pace as this war goes on, drags on. And they are also losing a lot of equipment, weapons, and materiel, and have been having trouble replacing them. As I've understood, two of their tank factories are closed down now for lack of spare parts. Again, the sanctions are beginning to bite. So I think I will be surprised myself if the Russians are able to keep up the momentum over time, which is perhaps one reason for the ferocity at the moment. They want to establish facts on the ground as quickly as they can.
And we have heard some reports of some Russian units losing heart, complaining that they've been stranded, that they haven't got the supplies that they need, and essentially giving up the fight.
That has been the case since February 24th, since practically the first days of the invasion. The Russians have performed miserably in terms of troop supply, in terms of their logistics train, in terms of ensuring that they have enough petrol and diesel to move their armored vehicles forward. So that has been a problem. They are in certain places now in a better situation because the rail lines are closer to the Ukrainian border, and they've had some better luck delivering supplies to the troops. But I think this has been a persistent problem for them since the start of the war, that their troops are going hungry and they're running out of petrol.
The Ukrainians have been saying for quite some time that they need more weaponry, more heavy armor, more rockets to try to fend off this latest Russian assault, which now extends along more than 600 miles of their territory in the east. How significant do you think has been what appears to be a change of heart by the Biden administration to send these longer range missiles?
Yes, I will note that the US is sending this advanced HIMARS system, as it's called, but the UK has also made the decision to send a UK equivalent system, which instead of being wheeled is tracked. And I think that both London and Washington have made significant decisions in sending these very capable longer range systems, which will have some potential to allow the Ukrainians to launch a counteroffensive. And that is the hope now, that with the arrival of these new systems in about 2 weeks' time and the training that will quickly take place, that they will be able to then launch into a counteroffensive phase of this fight. We will see they still lack a lot of air capability to provide for air superiority. That's always a major issue in a counteroffensive. But frankly, the Russians haven't been that good in controlling the skies themselves. So perhaps the Ukrainians will be successful with a counteroffensive.
But the Russians have, of course, reacted angrily to this decision from President Biden and indeed from the British Prime Minister to send these longer range missiles. Dmitry Peskov said the US was intentionally adding fuel to the fire. We've also had threats from the Kremlin that it would respond and potentially attack Western targets if these missiles are used against its forces. Do you think there is a risk that this decision by the UK and the US could escalate the conflict?
Moscow has been extremely careful since the outset of this war to not strike at targets on NATO territory at all. They have been, I think, strongly deterred from doing so, despite frequent threats that they would be attacking the deliveries of weapon systems coming to Ukraine from NATO countries across the board. So I would be surprised if they would escalate on the basis of the delivery of these new systems to the Ukrainians and their use in Ukraine. The Biden administration has been very clear in delivering a shorter range missile to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians have pledged at President Zelensky's level not to strike targets in Russian territory. I do think that there would be some escalatory potential there, and that is why Biden himself was insistent on this point that the Ukrainians promised to only use these systems inside Ukraine.
But they could, you think, be quite significant in trying to hold back or even force back the Russian forces along the east of the country.
Yes, they will be very capable of really striking at important hubs for the Russians, communications, logistics, command and control, deeper behind Russian lines. And I think that that will have the potential, again, to sow confusion, to sow real problems for the Russians in terms of continuing with their advance. And it's at that point that that the Ukrainians will be able to move to the counteroffensives phase.
There are no negotiations going on at the moment, certainly not at a senior level. President Macron has warned against trying to humiliate Russia, urging the West not to give in to the temptation of humiliation. And we've had the Italian Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, again calling for negotiations. Those remarks, particularly those from President Macron, have already prompted quite an angry reaction in Ukraine itself. What do you make of them?
Well, first of all, I really like the remarks that President Biden made in midweek. Actually, they were comments in a New York Times op-ed where he said, what we are doing in supplying new weapon systems and more capable weapon systems is helping the Ukrainians to get the best possible conditions to go to the negotiating table. So I do think that he set the right tone in saying, let's continue, intensify our efforts to aid the Ukrainians with military assistance. Let's create the best possible conditions for them to negotiate. I do think that the Russians have really humiliated themselves from the beginning of this fight with the performance of their armed forces. One number one. And number two, with the fact that Putin himself articulated certain strategic objectives, such as ensuring not only that NATO would not enlarge, but that it would return to its 1997 borders. Well, instead, he's seeing Helsinki and Stockholm, Finland and Sweden asking to join NATO. So it's 180 degrees different from what goals he had. So I do think that it's not a matter of others humiliating Russia. It's happening because of Russia's actions.
Are you concerned, though, that when you have figures like uh, President Macron, Prime Minister Draghi trying to push for negotiations, which has prompted angry reactions not just from Ukraine, but criticism from some other NATO leaders, that there is some disunity emerging within NATO, that some Western leaders want perhaps a more negotiated approach, whereas others are prepared to adopt a much more hardball stance?
Everyone within NATO, including President Biden, as I remarked a moment ago, on down. And President Zelensky himself says that they understand that this war will end at the negotiating table, will end with diplomacy. The question now is, at what moment is it right to return to the negotiating table? The best conditions for Ukraine are important so that it has a strong hand. But in negotiating terms, I'm sure the Russians will look for ways to portray themselves as having achieved important objectives. And therefore, they will come to the negotiating table when they are willing to do so with the sense that they too have won something. And that's just the way negotiations go. There always has to be an interest on both sides, unless one side is totally ground into the dirt and defeated militarily. But frankly, I don't see that happening. Everyone is also talking about this being a long war of attrition where neither side can get the total better of the other side. And so that is why I think everyone sees this ending in negotiations. But again, when the conditions are right for the Ukrainians.